Welcome back to Cyberspace, the podcast where we dive deep into psychology, culture, media, and technology. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, a business strategist and research psychologist. From boardrooms to dating apps, from schoolyards to social media, there's a phenomenon shaping how many men behave, often without them even realizing it. Today on Cyberspace, we're exploring compensatory masculinity, what it is, why it matters, and most importantly, how to break free from its grip. What exactly is compensatory masculinity? Dr. Willer's research defines this through what he calls the masculine overcompensation thesis. When men feel their masculinity is threatened or questioned, they often react by demonstrating extreme masculine behaviors. Dr. Jennifer Boston's research further developed this understanding, showing how manhood becomes a precarious social status that men feel they must constantly earn and maintain. Their studies reveal a fascinating pattern. Unlike womanhood, which society views as a natural and permanent state, manhood is seen as something that must be repeatedly proven through public actions. This creates what researchers call a precarious status, one that can be lost or questioned at any moment. Dr. Connell's groundbreaking work provides our framework for understanding this phenomenon. In Connell's 1995 book, Masculinities, he introduced the concept of hegemonic masculinity, the dominant ideal that many men feel pressured to perform. His study tracked how these pressures shape behavior from adolescence through middle age. In Dr. James Mahalick's study, he surveyed 524 men aged 18 to 65. His research found that 72% reported engaging in specific behaviors just to prove their masculinity to others. More recent research reveals the cost of these behaviors. Dr. Michael Addis's study examined the health implications of compensatory masculinity. His findings were stark. Men who scored high on measures of compensatory masculinity were 3 times more likely to avoid seeking medical help, 2.5 times more likely to engage in risky behavior, and 4 times more likely to report symptoms of depression. As we dig deeper into this topic, we'll explore how these patterns manifest across different spheres of life, from intimate relationships to global politics. But first, let's look at perhaps the most revealing arena where compensatory masculinity plays out, the world of modern dating. The research here paints a concerning picture of how these behaviors shape romantic relationships. Dr. Michael Kimmel's work gives us a critical context. In his 2008 book, Guyland, The Perilous World Where Boys Become Men, he documented what he terms the Guy Code, an unwritten set of rules equating masculinity with emotional stoicism and sexual conquest. Through extensive interviews and empirical research, Kimmel found that adherence to these rules directly correlated with higher rates of relationship dysfunction and personal distress. Other research found that men are more likely to engage in exaggerated masculine self-presentation if they're anticipating an email exchange or other less salient interaction as compared to a more salient one like a face-to-face meeting. But these patterns extend far beyond dating apps. Dr. Jackson Katz's 2019 research uncovered troubling correlations between compensatory masculinity and dating violence. His study found that men who strongly endorse traditional masculine norms are 4 times more likely to perpetrate dating violence. This finding aligns with the CDC data showing that 41% of women have experienced physical violence, sexual violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. Yet there's documented evidence of positive change. One study examined men who actively worked to overcome these patterns. That research, involving structured interviews and longitudinal data collection, found that men who successfully moved beyond compensatory behaviors reported 60% higher relationship satisfaction scores and significantly lower anxiety levels. These patterns don't disappear when dating turns into long-term partnership, they evolve. As we move into our next segment on family life, we'll explore how these same dynamics shape men's roles as partners and fathers. So what does happen when compensatory masculinity follows men into family life? The research reveals how these patterns fundamentally shape fatherhood and family dynamics. Let's start with Dr. Michael Lamb's thoroughly documented research from his book, The Role of the Father in Child Development. Through systematic observation of 150 father-child pairs, Lamb found that fathers who strongly adhered to traditional masculine norms spent an average of 15 fewer hours per week in direct childcare compared to those with more flexible views of masculinity. This finding gains deeper context through Dr. Richard Petz and Dr. Kevin Schaefer's study. Their research revealed a clear pattern. Fathers who adhere strongly to traditional masculine norms tend to be less involved in both the practical day-to-day tasks of parenting and the emotional work of building relationships with their children. Perhaps most concerningly, these fathers were significantly more likely to resort to harsh disciplinary methods. Dr. Ronald Levin's work adds another critical layer to our understanding. His study tracked 200 new fathers through their first year of parenthood. The findings were striking. Fathers who scored high on measures of traditional masculinity reported 40% more parenting stress and were 3 times more likely to describe feeling trapped or overwhelmed by the emotional demands of fatherhood. But there's hope in this story. The same research team found something fascinating. Men who see fatherhood as central to their identity and actively reject traditional breadwinner-only roles show remarkably different patterns. These fathers demonstrate significantly greater warmth and engagement in their parenting roles, with measurably better outcomes for their children's emotional development and academic performance. This connects directly to Dr. Joseph Pleck's longitudinal study examining what he terms generative fathering, a model that emphasizes emotional presence over traditional authority. His research documented clear benefits. Children of fathers who adopted this approach show higher emotional intelligence scores, better academic performance, and stronger family bonds. The American Journal of Public Health's meta-analysis adds urgency to this discussion. During pregnancy and early parenthood, rates of domestic violence increased by 25% among men who strongly endorsed traditional masculine norms. Dr. Catherine Haynes noted that this period often triggers intense anxiety about masculine identity and provider roles. One promising response comes from the Fatherhood Project at Massachusetts General Hospital. Their 5-year program evaluation showed that when fathers received support in developing emotional skills and challenging rigid masculine norms, they reported a 45% increase in time spent in direct childcare, a 60% improvement in communication with partners, and a 50% reduction in parenting stress. As we move into examining workplace dynamics, we'll see how these same patterns of compensatory masculinity shape professional relationships and career trajectories. Every woman who has been told they're too direct, told a man got their feelings hurt by simple feedback and retaliated against, or who has been harassed or attacked in their workplace, already knows that the workplace is where compensatory masculinity often becomes most visible and most costly, not just in human terms, but in actual dollars and cents. Dr. Jennifer Berdahl's landmark study revealed something business leaders can't afford to ignore. After examining 150 Fortune 500 companies, her research team found that organizations with what she terms masculinity contest cultures paid a heavy price. 35% higher turnover rates and 28% lower employee engagement scores. Think about what that means. 1 in 3 employees walking out the door because of these dynamics. So what exactly makes up a masculinity contest culture? Dr. Kimmel's research in the Journal of Business Ethics identified specific patterns: public shaming of perceived weakness, celebrating overwork as a sign of dedication, and using aggressive competition as the primary motivational tool. His research team documented these behaviors as especially prevalent in tech, finance, and law, industries with historically male-dominated leadership. The tech industry offers particularly clear evidence of these patterns. Some research findings were stark. Male engineers who felt their technical expertise questioned were twice as likely to display aggressive displays of technical knowledge that actually inhibited collaboration and innovation. Perhaps the most concerning findings come from Dr. Belle Rose Reagan's research on mentorship in corporate America. After tracking 500 mentor-mentee pairs across 5 years, she found that male mentors exhibiting high levels of compensatory masculinity were 70% less likely to effectively mentor female protégés. This directly impacts women's career advancement opportunities and helps explain persistent gender gaps in senior leadership. The financial impact is equally sobering. Dr. Joan Williams' research quantifies what she calls the masculinity tax, the hidden cost organizations pay when compensatory masculine behaviors drive decision-making. Her data shows companies with highly masculine leadership styles are 45% more likely to face litigation, 30% more likely to experience ethical breaches, and 25% more likely to see increased healthcare costs due to stress-related claims. McKinsey's Women in the Workplace studies consistently confirm this pattern. Companies that actively work to counter masculine contest cultures see 40% higher employee satisfaction scores, 35% lower turnover among women in leadership roles, and 28% higher innovation ratings from employees. As we shift our focus to the political arena, we'll see how these same dynamics play out on an even larger stage, shaping not just organizational culture, but national policy and international relations. When we examine compensatory masculinity in politics, we're looking at how these behaviors shape not just individual careers, but entire nations' policies and international relations. Marcus's research gives us better data on this phenomenon. His team analyzed speech patterns of political leaders across 30 democracies over a 20-year period. They found that masculine posturing, measured through specific language markers and policy positions, increased by 40% during periods of economic or social instability. This is not just rhetoric, it translates directly into policy decisions. A clear example comes from Dr. Kelly Dittmar's comprehensive study, Navigating Gender in American Politics. Her analysis of recent U.S. elections revealed that male candidates who emphasized traditionally masculine traits like aggression and dominance received 25% more media coverage. However, and this is key, this increased coverage didn't translate to electoral success. In fact, the candidates who displayed more balanced leadership styles had a 15% higher success rate in general elections. Another study revealed that women in political leadership positions face a double bind. They must demonstrate traditionally masculine leadership traits while simultaneously maintaining feminine qualities to avoid voter backlash. This data shows female politicians spend approximately 30% more time than their male counterparts managing their complex public image. Harvard Kennedy School examined crisis responses across 45 countries during recent global challenges. Their researchers found that nations led by individuals who relied heavily on compensatory masculine behaviors, measured through policy approaches and communication styles, showed 35% higher rates of civil unrest, 28% lower public trust scores, 40% less effective crisis management outcomes. However, the research also reveals promising shifts. The International Political Science Association's global survey shows an emerging trend. Voters increasingly value what they call integrative leadership, approaches that combine traditionally masculine traits like decisiveness with traditionally feminine traits like collaboration and empathy. This connects directly to Dr. Lawless's work. Her study of local and state governments found that political bodies with more balanced gender representation and leadership styles showed 45% higher rates of bipartisan legislation, 37% more public engagement in political processes, and 30% higher constituent satisfaction ratings. As we turn our attention to how these dynamics play out in art, music, and popular culture, we'll see how creative expression both reflects and challenges these political patterns. Art and music offer us a fascinating lens through which to view society's evolving relationship with masculinity. Through these creative channels, we see both the reinforcement of traditional masculine ideals and powerful challenges to them. Dr. Amy McDowell's research offers a compelling example in her study of Christian hardcore punk musicians. Her work documented how these performers navigate what might seem like contradictory expressions of masculinity, combining aggressive performance styles with open expressions of love or emotional vulnerability. This isn't just artistic choice, it's a direct response to changing expectations around masculine expression. Dr. Kai Hansen's research takes this further. His work revealed how pop music performances often operate in complex and sometimes contradictory ways, simultaneously reinforcing and challenging traditional gender norms. As Hansen documented, these aren't simple rebellions against old ideals, but rather careful negotiations of what masculinity can mean in modern culture. The performance of masculinity in music isn't just about the music itself. One study found that traditional masculine ideals can actually prevent men and boys from fully engaging with music. The work revealed how rigid gender norms create barriers around who can participate in music and how they're allowed to express themselves. But perhaps most intriguingly, Dr. Hansen's research demonstrated that these tensions in how masculinity is performed aren't just about individual artists. They reflect broader struggles in society. His work shows how the very process of creating and performing music has become a key battleground where traditional and emerging forms of masculinity meet and transform each other. The visual arts tell an equally compelling story. Dr. James Elkin's research, published in The Object Stares Back, documents a significant shift in how masculinity is portrayed in contemporary art. His survey of major art exhibitions shows something remarkable. There's been a 45% increase in works explicitly addressing masculine identity and vulnerability. But here's what's fascinating. These aren't just critiques of traditional masculinity. Instead, they're nuanced exploration of what it means to be a man in today's world. Dr. Bell Hook's final work before her passing, The Will to Change, gives us essential context for understanding these shifts. Her research documented how artists like Frank Ocean have created what she called spaces of masculine possibility, cultural zones where alternative expressions of masculinity become not just accessible but celebrated. The impact has been measurable. Following Ocean's openness about his sexuality and emotional life, Dr. Hook's team documented a 35% increase in male artists addressing similar themes in their work. But this isn't just about music and fine art. The world of television and film shows similar evolution. Dr. Kimmel's analysis of popular media reveals a fascinating trend. Shows featuring more complex male characters, those who display both strength and emotional intelligence, consistently outperformed shows stuck in traditional masculine stereotypes. We're seeing a 30% higher viewer engagement rate with programs that present more nuanced portrayals of masculinity. As we move into our final segment about breaking free from these patterns, remember, culture doesn't just reflect society, it helps shape it. The artists and creators we've discussed aren't just documenting change, they're helping make it. As we wrap up today's episode, let's talk about what might be the most important part of our discussion. How do we break free from these patterns? How do we move toward a more authentic expression of masculinity? Going back to Dr. Jennifer Boson, she revealed something critical. Many men are actually uncomfortable with traditional masculine norms, but feel pressured to conform anyway. Even more interesting, Dr. Andrea Berkowitz's research showed that most men incorrectly believe they're in the minority in feeling this discomfort. This phenomenon, called pluralistic ignorance, keeps many men trapped in behaviors they don't actually support. Dr. Ronald Levant's groundbreaking work tracked 300 men through a 2-year program of emotional awareness training. The results tell a powerful story of transformation. Men who simply learned to recognize and name their emotions experienced profound changes in their lives. They reported deeper connections with their partners, more meaningful relationships with their children, and perhaps most surprisingly, greater success in their careers. Dr. Michael Flood's research on men's anti-violence activism provides hope. His work shows that men can successfully challenge and transform their own gender privilege, though it requires conscious effort and support. Similarly, Dr. Karp's study demonstrates how men can effectively deconstruct hypermasculine norms and redefine masculinity in more positive ways. Let me share some numbers that might surprise you. From Levant's study, after just 6 months of practicing emotional awareness, participants showed a 68% improvement in relationship satisfaction. Think about that. Just by learning to identify and express their feelings, these men transformed their closest relationships, and more than 2/3 of them reported feeling truly connected to their partners for the first time. Here's where it gets really interesting. Dr. Niobe Wei's research on male friendships, published in her book Deep Secrets, Boys' Friendships and the Crisis of Connection, shows us something profound. Men who maintain close, emotionally supportive friendships are 45% less likely to engage in compensatory behaviors. They're more satisfied in their romantic relationships, better at handling stress, and this is important, they report feeling more authentically themselves. The workplace data is equally compelling. Dr. Stephen Stosny's recent research shows that men who work to overcome compensatory behaviors see remarkable professional benefits. Their leadership ratings improve by 60%. Team satisfaction under their management increases by 45%. They're more likely to mentor others effectively, and interestingly, they report feeling more secure in their positions despite showing what some might consider vulnerability. Dr. Flood's research on men's anti-violence activism provides hope. His work shows that men can successfully challenge and transform their own gender privilege, though it requires conscious effort and support. Similarly, Dr. Karp's study demonstrated how men can effectively deconstruct hypermasculine norms and redefine masculinity in more positive ways. The path forward requires several key elements, according to research. Dr. Mahalik helped his research team develop tools to help men explore both the benefits and costs of rigid masculine ideals. Dr. Levant's research offers practical guidance, suggesting that we need to view traditional masculinity through a cultural lens, understanding it as learned behavior that can be unlearned and reshaped. Their work shows that men can develop more flexible and authentic ways of expressing their masculinity while maintaining their sense of identity. Work by Von Lahr and colleagues emphasized that engaging men is crucial for progress. Their research reveals that while men may initially feel threatened by changes to traditional gender roles, they also suffer from these restrictive norms in terms of their physical and mental health, their work life, and their family relationships. Change isn't always easy. Men often face initial resistance from their peers when they begin to change these masculine patterns. But here's the encouraging part. After about 6 months, 85% of the men in Addis's study reported that their relationships had actually strengthened and not weakened as they became more authentically themselves. Today's exploration of compensatory masculinity reveals its profound impact on individual and societal levels. This phenomenon shapes behaviors, relationships, and institutions. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with one final thought. This isn't about rejecting masculinity, it's about expanding it, about finding ways to be strong without being rigid, confident without being aggressive, successful without sacrificing our authentic selves. The research shows us that it's possible, and more than that, it shows us that it's worth it. Thank you for joining us on PsyberSpace. This is your host, Leslie Poston, signing off. Until next time, keep questioning and stay curious.